Hello everyone, this week we are going to talk about consumers, producers, and the efficiency of markets. First, let's talk about welfare economics. Welfare economics refers to the allocation of resources, and when we say allocation of resources, we refer to how much of each good is produced, which producers produce it, which consumers consume it. So, welfare economics studies how the allocation of resources affects economic well-being. And as a result, the equilibrium of supply and demand maximizes the total benefits received by all buyers and sellers combined. All along this chapter, we are going to show that actually the free market allocates the resources the best way that maximizes the social welfare. Let's start with consumer surplus. First, let's define willingness to pay, or WTP. Willingness to pay is the maximum amount the buyer will pay for that good, and it represents how much the buyer values the good. So consumer surplus, or CS in short, is equal to willingness to pay minus price. So it's the amount a buyer is willing to pay minus the amount the buyer actually pays. And that shows the benefit buyers receive from participating in a market. So let's assume that you are willing to pay for a used iPhone 13, $800. And in the market, you find the iPhone 13, $700, a used one. So the willingness to pay is $800 here, price is $700, and you think that you get a bargain. That bargain represents your consumer surplus. Now let's see this example to understand willingness to pay and consumer surplus. You work at the local store that sells refurbished iPads. The store is running a sale on the refurbished iPad Mini 3. Each of your roommates wants to buy an iPad Mini 3. Their willingness to pay is given in the table. Alexis, $250, Cameron, $175, Fatima, $300, Jamir, $125. Question: if the sale price is $200, who will buy an iPad and what is the quantity demanded? If the price is $200, your roommates are going to compare their willingness to pay with the price, and if the willingness to pay is higher than the price, then they will buy. In this case, Alexis is going to buy, Fatima is going to buy, Cameron doesn't want to pay more than $175, is not going to buy, Jamir is not going to buy, so the quantity demanded will be 2 iPads. Now let's drive the demand curve based on the price. If the price is $300 and up, none of these roommates are going to buy. Nobody, quantity demanded is 0. If the price is between $251 and $300, and then Fatima is going to buy, therefore quantity demanded is 1. If the price is $176 and $250, Fatima is going to buy, Alexis is going to buy, therefore we have 2, quantity demanded 2. If the price is $126 and $175, then Cameron, Alexis, and Fatima are going to buy. Quantity demanded is 3. If the price is between 0 and $125, then all 4 buy, and therefore quantity demanded is 4. Now let's derive the demand curve based on this demand schedule. If the price is $301 and up, nobody buys. Therefore, the demand curve is at 0. And now if the price is between $251 and $300, then Fatima is going to buy. That's why the quantity demanded now shows 1. And if the price is $176 and $250, then 2 of the roommates are going to buy. Therefore, the quantity demanded is 2. And then continue like that. You will draw the remaining part of the demand curve. This demand curve looks like a staircase with 4 steps, 1 per buyer. If there were a huge number of buyers, as in a competitive market, there would be a huge number of very tiny steps and it would look more like a smooth curve. So at any quantity, the height of the demand curve is willingness to pay of the marginal buyer. So here, for instance, the height of the curve is 300, you see. And that represents the willingness to pay of Fatima's. And why we call this a marginal buyer? She is a marginal buyer because if the price is any higher, like 301, she's going to leave the market. So the marginal buyer is the buyer who would leave the market if the price were any higher. And here the height of the demand curve is 250 and represents Alex's willingness to pay. Here it's 150, it represents Cameron's willingness to pay, and so on. So consumer surplus is equal to willingness to pay minus price. Suppose the price is 260. Fatima's consumer surplus is 300, her willingness to pay minus the price 260, $40. And the others are not going to get any consumer surplus because they do not buy an iPad mini at this price. So consumer surplus is either 0 or any positive number. It cannot be negative. If willingness to pay is less than price, consumers are not going to buy, therefore their consumer surplus is 0. So total consumer surplus in this market is $40. Let's understand the consumer surplus on the demand curve. If the price is 260, then here, this area, that means the price curve, this is the price line, 260, and the demand curve, the area between these two, represents the consumer surplus. So this is a rectangular area, and we know that here, this part is 40, and this part is 1. So the area can be found by 40 times 1, which is 40. The green shaded area is the consumer surplus. Suppose now the price is 220. Let's find the consumer surplus. So first let's define the consumer surplus. It's the area between the price line. This is my price line, which is 220. At 220, it's a horizontal line. And the demand curve. Here is my demand curve, the red one. So now let's calculate this area. We can divide this area into two. This is one here, you can see. One rectangular, and there is one rectangular here too. Let's calculate area 1. Area 1 is, I need here the height, which is 300 minus 220, 80. And the width is 1. Therefore, the first area is 80. Now let's calculate the second area. Second area, I need first this height, which is 250 minus 220, 30, times 1, 30. So the total consumer surplus is the sum of these two areas, 80 plus 30, which is equal to 110. So the consumer surplus is equal to 110 when the price is 220. So you can see now on the slide, green shaded area is 80 and dark green shaded area is 30. So the consumer surplus is 110. Total consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the price. The height of the demand curve is equal to the value buyers place on the good, which is willingness to pay. So each buyer's consumer surplus is willingness to pay minus price. The sum of the consumer surplus of all buyers in the market is the total consumer surplus. This example is showing the demand for t-shirts. Now the demand curve is now smooth. You have many buyers in this market. That's why it's not staircase. Now at quantity 5, the marginal buyer is willing to pay $50 for a t-shirt. And let's assume price is $30. Now we are going to calculate the consumer surplus. In this case, for this buyer, here, there is one buyer, willingness to pay is 50 and price is 30. For this buyer, thinks that he gets a $20 of bargain. Then his individual consumer surplus is 20. Now let's look at the quantity demanded is 15 and the price is 30. Consumer surplus, which is this time total consumer surplus, is the area between the price and the demand curve, and that represents the consumer surplus of all buyers, not only one single buyer. And this is a triangular area. The blue shaded area is a triangular. If you remember, the area of a triangle equals 1/2 times base times height. Given this formula, we can find the height. Height is 60 minus 30, which is 30. And base is 15, right? You can see here 15. And then consumer surplus is 1 over 2 times 15 times 30, 225. And if the prices are getting higher, consumer surplus is going down. Let's see if the price is $40, what happens? Now the consumer surplus is the green shaded triangle. Now the height is different. Height is 20. Base is different, 10. So therefore new consumer surplus is 100. So we see a decrease in consumer surplus for two reasons. First of all, here there are some consumers, right? And they leave the market. Why? Because they are not willing to pay $40. So the first reason is fall in consumer surplus due to buyers leaving the market. And that is represented by this small triangular area. And the second reason is there is a fall in consumer surplus due to remaining buyers. There are remaining buyers here, right? They are paying $40. They are on the demand curve. But actually, they are now paying more for the good. Therefore, their consumer surplus is falling. That area represents fall in consumer surplus due to remaining buyers paying higher price. Now, let's answer this question. First, find marginal buyer's willingness to pay at quantity 10. Remember, the height of the demand curve at that quantity tells us the willingness to pay of that marginal buyer. There is one buyer here who's buying the 10th product, and this person's willingness to pay is equal to height of the demand curve. For that reason, it's $30. The height of the demand curve is $30 at quantity 10. And next, we will find the consumer surplus for P is equal to 30. If P is equal to 30, then this is the price line. And consumer surplus is the area between the demand curve and the price line. So this is a triangular. We need the height and base, and then we can calculate the area. Height is 10. Base is 10 divided by 2, which is 100 divided by 2, $50 is the total consumer surplus when the price is 30. Now let's assume that price falls to 20. How much will consumer surplus increase due to buyers entering the market and due to existing buyers paying lower price? So now in this case, price drops to 20. This is new price line. And previous consumer surplus was this area. But now we have an additional area, right? This is an additional consumer surplus added. Why? Because the price falls to $20. Now we need to find increase in consumer surplus due to existing buyers. Remember, these are the buyers who are buying the product when it's 30 and they continue to buy when the price is 20. Therefore, until here, we have existing buyers because they are willing to buy the product at 30. And the increase in their consumer surplus is this rectangular area. Let's find it. Here, existing buyers, we are doing this part. The height is 10 times the base is 10. You don't need to divide because this is rectangular. Therefore, $100 come from existing buyers. Now let's calculate increase in consumer surplus because of new buyers. Here, new buyers enter to the market and they are willing to pay 20 and up, but they are not willing to pay 30. So there is an increase in consumer surplus because of these new buyers, and that is this triangular area. Let's calculate. This is the height, which is 10, and this is the base, which is 10 too, 10, 10. So 10 times 10 over 2, which is 50. So new consumer surplus increased by $150, and $50 comes from buyers entering the market, and $100 comes from existing buyers paying lower price. Now next we talk about producer surplus. First, let's define cost. Cost is the value of everything a seller must give up to produce a good. It includes the opportunity cost. So that means if you spend 10 hours to produce a product, then you need to include the time lost, which is 10 hours, because with that 10 hours you could have earned a wage from another job. Therefore, this should be included in the cost. Willingness to sell, or WTS, is the lowest price accepted by a seller for 1 unit of a good or service. The cost is a measure of willingness to sell, produce and sell the good service only if price is higher than cost. So if the price is higher than cost, then you produce, otherwise you don't. So producer surplus PS is equal to P minus cost, or it's the amount a seller is paid for a good minus the seller cost of providing it. It is price received minus willingness to sell, and it measures the benefit sellers receive from participating in a market. Let's see this example. You are the lucky owner of 3 properties with identical lawns that need mowing. There are 3 lawn mowing businesses in town that you can hire. The table below shows their willingness to sell. First, derive the supply schedule from the cost data. Jean, cost is $10, Jeda, $20, Chris, $35. So if the price is 0 to 9, none of the businesses are going to provide the service. Quantity supplied is 0. If it's 10 to 19, Jean is going to supply, so quantity supplied is 1. If it's 20 to 34, 2 of these businesses are going to supply. And if it's 35 and up, all of them are going to supply the service. Now let's draw our demand curve. Now let's draw our supply curve based on this supply schedule. 0 to 1, no businesses are going to supply. 0 to 9, no businesses are going to supply. 10 to 19, only 1 business. 20 to 34, 2 businesses. 35 and up, 3 businesses. At each quantity, the height of the supply curve is the cost of the marginal seller. So who is the marginal seller? Marginal seller is the one who would leave the market if the price were any lower. So here, this represents marginal seller, the point here. The reason is Jean's cost is $10, and if the price is any lower, Jean is going to leave the market. Jeda, 20, Chris, 30. Chris, 35. And producer surplus is price minus cost. Suppose price is $25. Then Jean's producer surplus is the area between the price line and the supply curve. And that is equal to 25 minus 10, 15. This is the Jean's producer surplus. And for Jeda, it's the green rectangular area. The price is 25 and Jeda's cost is 20, therefore it's $5. And Chris producer surplus is 0 because Chris is not going to supply this service at that price. So the total producer surplus is 20. Why? 15 comes from Jean and 5 comes from Jeda. It's $20. So, as a summary, producer surplus is the area below the price and above the supply curve. The height of the supply curve measures seller's cost, and each seller's producer surplus is price minus cost. And total area is the sum of the producer surplus of all sellers. Now let's see a more realistic supply curve, and this is the supply for t-shirts, and it's more smooth, it's not staircase. Suppose the price is $40 and at quantity 15, the marginal seller's cost here, the height of the supply curve shows the marginal seller's cost, it's 30, and her producer surplus only for this marginal seller is 10. $40 is the price minus the cost 30. Producer surplus is the area between price and the supply curve from 0 quantity to the quantity that you want to measure. And the height of this triangular is 40 minus 15, which is 25. So producer surplus is 15, which is height, times the base. So the producer surplus is the area, the green triangular area, and the height is 25, and the base is 25. So 25 times 25 divided by 2, 312.5 is the total producer surplus. If price falls to 30, producer surplus is going to go down, right? The new producer surplus is going to be yellow triangular area. Now the height is 15 and base is 15. 15 times 15 divided by 2, 112.5. And we see two reasons for the fall in producer surplus. The first one is fall in producer surplus due to sellers leaving the market. Remember, there are sellers here, but now the cost is higher than the price, they leave the market. And the second one is the fall in producer surplus due to remaining sellers getting lower price. Let's see this example. Find marginal seller's cost at $10. Find marginal seller's cost at quantity 10. The height of the supply curve tells us the cost of marginal seller. So there is one seller here and his cost is 20 because the height is 20. Find total producer surplus for price 20. You need to draw a price line at 20. And remember, the area between the price line and the supply curve is the total producer surplus, which is this area. And that is 20 height and 10 base. So therefore 20 times 10 over 2, which is 100. Suppose price rises to 30. Find the increase in producer surplus due to selling 5 additional units. So now the price rises to 30 and now we are selling 5 more additional units. And now you need to find out the increase in producer surplus due to selling 5 additional units and getting a higher price on the initial 10 units. So we know that here these sellers sell the 5 additional units. Okay. The remaining are existing sellers. They were in the market when the price is 20 and they are still selling when the price is 30. So there is an increase in their producer surplus from the existing sellers, right? And that is this area. Let's find this area first, which is height 10 and then base is 10. But this is a rectangular area, therefore 10 times 10 is 100. Now we are going to find here this area which represents the increase in producer surplus because of selling 5 additional units. Here 5 and this is 10. Therefore 10 times 5, since this is a triangular, divide by 2, 25. So producer surplus increased total 125. 100 of them comes from the sellers, existing sellers getting a higher price, and $25 comes from selling 5 additional units. So let's talk about benevolent social planner. Benevolent social planner is the good character. It's an hypothetical character and an all-knowing, all-powerful, well-intentioned dictator. And this benevolent social planner wants to maximize the economic well-being of everyone in the society. Now we are going to evaluate market outcomes, and this social planner cares about efficiency and equity. First, allocation of resources. Question: are they desirable? In a decentralized, which is a market economy that there is no social planner, it's determined by interactions of many self-interested buyers and sellers. So total surplus is a measure of society's well-being. So let's think about whether this total surplus is efficient or not. Total surplus is the sum of consumer surplus plus producer surplus. Consumer surplus is equal to value to buyers minus amount paid, which represents buyers' gains from participating in the market. Producer surplus is equal to amount received by sellers minus cost to sellers, which represents sellers' gains from participating in the market. So total surplus is value to buyers minus cost to sellers. Let's define efficiency. Efficiency is the allocation of resources that maximizes total surplus. Is the pie as big as possible? That's the question. Are we getting the most out from a transaction? Are we getting the most from a market transaction? Equality, on the other hand, distributes economic prosperity uniformly among the members of society. Every member of society gets an equal slice of the pie. Free market outcomes. First of all, allocate the supply of goods to the buyers who value them most, as measured by their willingness to pay. As you remember, in the market transaction, the people who value the most gets the good. Second, allocate the demand for goods to the sellers who can produce them at the lowest cost. As you remember, in the market outcome, the sellers who has the lowest cost sell first. 3. Produce the quantity of goods that maximizes the sum of consumer and producer surplus. Raising or lowering the quantity of a good would not increase total surplus. So let's see this example on a demand and supply graph. We now evaluate the market equilibrium. Market equilibrium is $30 and quantity is 15. Now there is a consumer surplus shaded by blue area, and then yellow area represents producer surplus. And total surplus is the sum of two, consumer surplus plus producer surplus. Is the market equilibrium efficient? That's the question. If we say it's efficient, then we maximize social welfare. Now let's assume for that outcome, let's find out which buyers consume the good. Every buyer whose willingness to pay is more than $30, more than or equal to $30 will buy. Every buyer whose willingness to pay is less than $30 will not buy. The buyers who value the good most highly are the ones who consume it in the market outcome. Now let's look at from the seller's perspective. Which sellers produce the good? Every seller whose cost is less than equal to $30 will produce the good. Every seller whose cost is greater than $30 will not. Again, the sellers with the lowest cost produce the good. And now the next question is, does equilibrium quantity maximizes total surplus? At quantity 20, let's think about at quantity 20. The cost of producing the marginal unit is $35. You can see that right here, $35. And the value to consumers of the marginal units is 20. So there's some kind of negative value here. Hence, can increase total surplus. You can increase the total surplus going in this direction. Why? Because lower negative, you get a lower and lower negative value if you move in that direction. This is true at any quantity greater than 15. At quantity 10, cost of producing the marginal unit is 25. You can see here from the supply curve. And the value to consumers of the marginal unit is 40. Hence, you can increase total surplus by increasing quantity. If you move in that direction, you are adding a net benefit. This is true at any quantity less than 15. So for that reason, as you see, if you go less than 15, you have room to increase total surplus. If you go above 15, you have room to increase total surplus. Therefore, quantity is equal to 15 maximizes total surplus. Adam Smith and the Invisible Hand, which is a passage, so there is a passage from The Wealth of Nations, his famous book, 1776. It's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interests. Every individual neither intends to promote the public interest nor knows how much he is promoting it. He intends only his own gain, and he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. By pursuing his own interests, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. So, forces of supply and demand allocate resources efficiently. So, forces of supply and demand allocate resources efficiently. Assumptions about how markets work. First, markets are perfectly competitive. Second, outcome in a market matters only to the buyers and sellers in that market. When these assumptions do not hold, market equilibrium is efficient may no longer be true. So we will talk about market failures in the following weeks. One of the examples is market power. A single buyer or seller control market prices. In that case, markets are inefficient. Second is externalities. Decisions of buyers and sellers affect people who are not participants in the market at all, and that represents an inefficient equilibrium from the standpoint of society as a whole. This is the end of chapter 7. Thank you.